What's going on? Happy Software Sunday, my people. I'm KD. This is our weekly show where we talk about everything going on in tech and how to improve as engineers in our career or with any of the ventures that we're working on. We got a couple exciting things to talk about this week, so let's get started. So, something I wanted to touch on is that Git 3.0 is going to have some changes where they're changing the default branch from master to main. Now, this is a simple change that is actually going to have a couple major impacts if your pipelines or if your software and teams are using master or using the default naming for any of your branches. That's going to mean if you're having some type of automation pointing at your main branch or when you're creating any sample applications, you're going to have to make that change to update it to main or whatever the default branch that you configure for your team needs to be. And it's simple, but just make sure you have to actually update it where it needs to be updated if you do have a large number of code bases. For existing services, it may not be so much of an issue, but as you're adding new applications and systems and relying on the old implementation of Git, that's where you might have the most severe and impactful issues. I thought it was interesting that the change was even made because everyone kind of knows that the default branch is master. Everyone is using master. I have been actually transitioning a lot of my branches to use main, just personally. But if you do a normal git init, you know what that default branch is going to be. I think that the change, and I haven't spoken to anyone from GitHub to really clarify or add any context for this, but I feel like the change is more of a cultural consideration because now engineering and tech is becoming more diverse, and maybe the concept of master slave is no longer the go-to idea that people even want to have. It's almost like if you go into a culture with the same product marketing or same content that you're using in the US and taking that to Japan, you might not have the same impact as you would in a different market because the culture of the people is going to be a lot different. So the things that they consider important or the things that they want to hear has shifted. With a traditionally mostly Caucasian group in the tech space, master slave may not have raised any flags. When you have black people coming into the building and hearing master slave, nobody would really want to hear that. So I can imagine that has had some type of impact in just making us all better in that space. I also wanted to talk about the fact that China is closing in on the American AI frontier. I know we have OpenAI, which was one of the forerunners for the current AI wave that we're having. And when they released ChatGPT, that kind of set the stage for what can be built with generative AI using large language models. When DeepSeek came out, I think earlier this year, that was the first time we started seeing the optimization of AI and the innovation heading and originating from somewhere other than the US. And it was exceptionally cheaper than what we could run in the US, especially considering most of the frontier models from AI labs, from Anthropic and OpenAI, those all run via a hosted cloud. So you're not only paying for the infrastructure cost, you're paying for the model licensing that way. So it could be more expensive over the long run, especially when you are a new startup. So we're starting to see a lot of startups in the US especially, and also in other regions, including Africa, going and focusing more on using DeepSeek and those other open source Chinese models. Because whereas with an OpenAI ChatGPT, you have to run the model on their cloud servers. If you're running DeepSeek, you can actually set up your own infrastructure, your own servers and hardware to run that model yourself. So it does give you a slight advantage in terms of cost for what you can actually build and the scale that you can build it at before you start seeing significant, AWS or Azure billing coming from your cloud provider. I think it's interesting though, just the open source, closed source model distinction. For the US capitalism, we are starting off always from monetizing the products and services that we bring to market. China took the opposite route, where they're focusing more on getting that market share by releasing all of the software for free. And now, because the cost of entry is lower, they start getting more people to at least play with it. I will say that in terms of the sophistication and the level of, I would say, the power of the model itself, DeepSeek is not better than some of the other foundation models, but there are some applications that don't need the best model. They just need something good enough to get it to work on your machine. And so they're gonna get the customers that they need to get. And I'm not sure if that means that we'll have a decrease in the number of users of ChatGPT and OpenAI models, but it definitely makes it a more distributed market for people and businesses that are looking for that intelligence. At a time where people are talking about an AI bubble, I wonder how that's going to impact the state and the future of the growth. Because regular supply and demand, right? If we have the same supply of models and demand is rising, that does make the supply more expensive and more valuable. But when you start throwing in these other cheaper models, does that make the models that are already existing and that have become exceptionally pricey, does that make them a little bit less valuable to the market overall? I'm not sure. But that's something interesting to keep an eye on, because when DeepSeek was first released, we did see a little drop in the market for a lot of these growth companies, because no one thought that China could even build the same systems that we had on the US without the access to the technology we have access to. So I wonder what the future looks like when they do start being more competitive in the LLM space. But China is not the region or the country to be playing around with if you are in the high tech early edge growth space. And then with the 2025, I know the job market has been a little rough for everyone across the economy, right? With this increase in the availability of intelligence, one from offshoring and two from artificial intelligence, we are seeing a more difficult market for employees to find new roles for themselves. I think last year, the average number of job listings per month was over 100K. Now, in 2025, we're in a market where I think the average might be closer to 50,000. And there were almost, I don't know if it was larger layoffs in this year, but definitely more companies that were laying off still, with less new opportunities for those same employees. So the job market has been a little interesting, and recent reports are saying for applicants, LinkedIn is no longer the main source for finding some of the best talent, especially because of the number of people just flocking to the space, the number of automated applications, a lot of them not even relevant to the role. So there's a lot of noise coming from LinkedIn. I still think it might have a significant value add as a portfolio and as a network building tool. But in terms of a job listing site, it's no longer the top, especially for heavy tech roles. There are some other platforms. Can't remember the name of the one that is on my mind right now. I think Wander. I can't remember the name of it right now, but I'll put that inside of the captions or in the description later on. But there are other places to, one, find talent, and also find employees and opportunities for you if you are talent looking for your next role. And don't try to pigeonhole yourself into thinking LinkedIn is the best place for you to be looking, especially now when we're in an employer's market. So that means employers are taking more time and being a lot more picky with the employees that they're hiring. You don't want to be one of 1,000 inside of the list coming from LinkedIn. You want to go find your opportunity either through networking or through these other platforms, which are a little bit more niche for either the startup space or the whatever industry you might be really targeting. There are other places to start and continue your search. I think the main thing right now with the state of the jobs market for tech especially is just to remember there's more competition looking for those same roles that you're looking for. The roles are also becoming a little bit more, I guess the bar for them is a little higher, especially now. Like, you may still be looking for a remote only role. That may not be what's available in your region right now or at the time zone that we're looking at, because more people are starting to believe that, hey, maybe we do need that team to be in place a little more. So you might have to, or you might consider or want to consider looking into some roles that are, in your region, more in your city. So that does make the location of where you are as an engineer slightly more important, right? If you're on the East Coast, being inside of New York, if you're trying to become an engineer for a financial services company, might be a little bit better than if you were an engineer in Virginia, right? If you're in the Midwest, maybe you might want to go to San Francisco and Palo Alto to actually get your next role or be with and where the opportunities are. And that's really the main thing. You have to be where the opportunity is. And that is constantly changing. The opportunity could have been on some platform or in some region a year ago, but we're not in that same time today. So you have to be adaptable. You have to make sure you are doing what needs to be done for the current moment. And another interesting thing that I'm seeing with AI and even the economy is that OpenAI is taking or has taken a stake inside of Thrive Capital. If you're not familiar, Thrive Capital is a private equity firm that has purchased a number of Main Street businesses. And the initial focus for this partnership is to use artificial intelligence to accelerate and standardize and lower the cost of the accounting and IT services for those businesses that are being purchased. So from the private equity standpoint, they're always looking to increase margins. They're going into and starting businesses and investing in businesses with great profit margins and opportunities to increase that profit margin, because that's what private equity is looking for. AI as a platform and as a tool is one of the most, at least in the current timeline in 2025, that's one of the most impactful tools for lowering the cost of building anything. So if you're partnering one of the front runners of artificial intelligence with I won't call them a behemoth, but a pretty powerful player inside of the private equity space, we're going to start seeing them using ways to use AI to actually increase those margins inside of those Main Street businesses while also making those businesses more efficient. If you're inside of a mechanic shop, or if you're inside of a doctor's office, there are a number of functions that business is doing that can be automated. And that's what private equity is looking at with this partnership. They're saying, how can I automate this function inside of this very specific domain so that we can increase our margins and make the business more valuable? That's going for the companies that aren't doing that. If you're in the same space, you're going to have some competition, because now you're competing with someone who is getting tech-like profit margins inside of a business that you're in. If you're not getting those same margins, you're not going to be able to compete with the marketing budget that they'll have, with the talent budget that they'll have. So you have to think about that. How do I use AI inside of my business to ensure that I'm creating a moat around my domain and my customers? And the fact that we're seeing OpenAI building in that space is also interesting, because AI as a platform has kind of reached the limit of what it can learn from the open free internet, right? It's been trained on Reddit. It's been trained on a bunch of blogs across the internet, comments and things from different websites. A lot of that general knowledge and information has already been consumed, and we're starting to see the effectiveness of the AI and that same training starting to deteriorate, because at this point that training material is also being it's being filled with AI generated content. So if we start seeing a bunch of AI being trained on other AI content, and that does start to impact the intelligence and the learning of those models themselves. So they're looking for other ways to increase the domain-specific knowledge of their models. And so if you're building an LLM that is supposed to be great for accounting, what better way to train your LLM than to embed your engineers inside of a business that is actively doing accounting, or actively doing accounting not only for one type of business, for a dozen different businesses inside of different markets. So they're building their own moat just by going into this partnership, which is super interesting. And it's extending the trend of forward deployed engineers, which I think was kind of originated from Palantir, where they're having engineers who work in your organization but are being placed inside of the client, which makes it more likely that your solution is actually going to be the solution to that client's problem. It makes it more difficult for the client to get rid of you because you are so deeply ingrained inside of their processes. And it just makes it, as a business owner and as a team building the product and trying to get more customers, having an engineer inside of their business makes it more valuable for you because now they almost can't get rid of you. So it's a great opportunity for everyone involved. And it makes me think that engineers in the future, you have to think beyond just being the technical resource. You have to think beyond just being, I know how to write code. You really need to start learning more about the domain and the business that you are building in. You need to understand the business functions that happen. You need to understand how this business makes money, what the customers care about, what the different units across the organization need in order to function at their best. Because at this point, anyone can write code. So what is that distinction that you bring? Of course, as an engineer, you have some knowledge of architecture. You understand the best practices for writing code, or at least you should. But now it becomes, how do I actually help drive some of the business goals that we have? So I'm no longer just a cost on the business. I'm actually impacting the top line and bottom line. So think about that as you are going about your career and seeing how can you be the most valuable and add value into the teams that you're joining. And with that thought, we do have a few questions this week from people that want to know how to become a better engineer and want to know how do we grow as engineers and make it more likely for us to thrive in our careers. So let's get started on that.
What is the difference between disk level, row level, and column level encryption?
Yeah, so this is an interesting problem to think about for someone working in cybersecurity or responsible for building secure software systems. First, you need to understand that encryption is just the process of converting readable data into an unreadable format. And I say unreadable to everyone who does not have the key. So when you're encrypting at disk level, that means you're encrypting the bits that live on the hard drive or the SSD that the data is being stored on, and you're encrypting that volume or those files so that if anyone were to copy the hard drive or get access to the hard drive directly, they wouldn't be able to access that data. That has its benefits in certain applications because, we don't mind if the hardware is accessed, because even if you get access to the hardware, you can't do anything with it. And that's probably good up until a certain point, and I'll actually bring that up a little bit later. But row level means you're encrypting the data per row. So if you're working on a multi-tenant application, which means you have a bunch of different customers all using the same database, you can encrypt the data so that only a specific user from that organization has access to the data that has been created. This is important for industries where you're having to provide, PCI protection or PII protection for very sensitive data, even within the healthcare space, where you want to make sure that even if there was some bug with the technology or the application, the wrong person will never be able to access it. And that can also be helpful in case there was some type of insider attack or insider threat risk, where just because I am the engineer working on the application and I have access to the database, I still don't have access to the key used to encrypt and decrypt that data. So I still don't get anything of value from having access to that data. So it's almost like how do I protect the data from the people that it needs to be protected from based on the level of risk involved. And we also have column level encryption, which is a little bit easier, where if you're trying to protect maybe an SSN column inside of your database, you can encrypt all that entire column and every field inside of that column where it's unreadable even to a engineer on your team, or if the data was somehow copied by some bad actor, they wouldn't be able to do anything with that sensitive information. Disk level encryption is the simplest because it's really looking at the entire volume as a whole and just saying, I'm going to encrypt anything that I see here. And it can protect against external harm if someone were to get access to the node that your application is running in. Column level is useful for encrypting database fields without increasing the complexity of the system, because every row inside of the column is going to get the same key. And so it's very easy to rotate keys, decrypt and encrypt when you need to. And row level is the most secure, but also the most difficult to implement at scale. Because if every organization using your database has their own key, then key rotation becomes a bit more complex, because you have to rotate multiple keys for multiple roles. And so it may take more time and energy from your engineering team to actually plan and implement. And it may also require some type of downtime, which may or not be okay for your business, depending on what you're doing. And so it's more moving parts automatically add to the complexity of it. But it all depends on what is the requirement for the application and industry that you're building in.
How much do software engineers make?
So as an engineer, you can make anywhere between 100K and 500K, depending on the role and the company that you choose to work in. And I want to also add that the income is heavily tied to the difficulty of the problem that you're solving. So don't think when I'm saying you can make 500K, you making 500K just doing anything. That 500K might be the hardest 500K you ever made. So keep that in mind. It's possible, but don't just think it's an easy job to do. The average engineer is making closer to like 150, I'd say like 120 to like 160 per year. And that is in most roles and most companies. And you can do something like development, where you're building front-end applications or back-end applications with some type of programming language and framework. But it could also be inside of QA testing, where you're responsible for running through a set of tests to either validate the functionality of the application or to document what the application is really doing. And that could be a great opportunity for some people that are interested in that type of procedural type activities. You can also work in cyber as a technical engineer or as someone who's just familiar with the regulations and rules for the space. If you're more of a legal expert, or if you're just into reading about the changes in policy. And that's for engineering. In tech, you could also be inside some type of sales role or product management role where you're responsible for less of the engineering and technical aspect of the product or service, but more aligned to the business and how the business is actually managing and organizing resources. And so there's plenty of opportunities. I also think it's super important to highlight that if you are a freelance developer that either just built apps or just worked with your own clients and set up your own client network, there is no cap to the income that you can make because there is no cap other than like physical time and energy available to the number of applications you could build and the number of clients you could serve. And you could technically charge these people anything you want to charge them. You can, I know people that are charging $1,000 for a single page website hosting, not React single page application. I mean, they created one HTML page with a few different elements and they're charging businesses $1,000 per month. That's crazy. If anyone knows how much it costs to host a website, you could do it yourself with Squarespace and get an entire website, not a web page, for less than $100. So you really could go into this however you want to go into it. So myself, I'm on the W2 space where I do have a role currently in cyber where I'm helping a financial company secure the applications and manage the remediation of any of the findings that we have. But I also have extended and expanded my working hours to continue to build the software that I feel and that I know is solving real world problems because I know I can build another pipeline of clients and income from these other applications that I build. And yeah, it's definitely, I'm gonna say a balancing act, but you have to find some harmony inside of the level of effort you're willing to give, as well as the amount of income you're expecting from the effort that you're putting in. But, at that point, the answer really is you could make 100K to an infinite amount of money. But that's beyond engineering. You could do that in anywhere.
When is the best time to do deep work?
So I personally prefer to build and code earlier in the morning, but that will look very different for everyone. There are some people that are the night owls when you see them dark screen, middle of the night, lights off, and that's when they're able to churn out the most code. That's not me. I'm more of a morning person. I don't even like staying up late. And everyone is going to have their own natural energetic cycles. So you have to make sure you align that with the work and the activities that you need to get done for that specific time. And you can prioritize it. You can say whatever time is the most energized for me, maybe that's when I do my most difficult work. That's when I solve the most challenging problems necessary for me to solve. And that could be at a day-to-day thing. It could be a weekly cycle that you're mindful of, and also monthly and yearly. There are times of the year where you may change the time that you go on your walks, the times that you eat, the times that you are focused or even having your meetings, because the energy inside of you has to align with the things that you're working with. If you're working on a large team where there are more people to kind of sync with, you have to be a little bit more understanding that your best time may not be the best time for everyone else, and that may require you to be a little bit more flexible. But that's always a conversation that you can have with your management and the people that work with you to understand, hey, this is what works best for me, and this is how I can be the most valuable to the team. And let's see how we can do that in a way that allows us to be the most consistent, and the most effective for the mission that we're currently working on. And remember that your energy is going to ebb and flow throughout your day. You have to be able to align that energy with the routine that works for you on the most consistent basis. The best part about having the routine and being understanding of the energy that you have is that you can structure and optimize your day so that you are always ready to do the work that needs to be done at the right time, regardless of how you feel in that moment. And that means sometimes keeping the work session, your deep session, sacred. That means turning off any notifications, which honestly you probably shouldn't have any notifications on ever. Like, I don't have Instagram notifications to my phone. I don't have anything. I even separate my emails from, the subscriptions or the places that you shop, so that I don't even get emails to my main email account when I'm trying to go through some financial or some business opportunity and having a bunch of nonsense showing up inside of my list that's drawing my attention. So you have to be mindful of the deep work session is the best time where you can ensure that you will not be distracted from the mission. It's all about the mission and keeping that front and center inside of your mind.
Why does my API need to be idempotent?
So when you're building an application that needs to be consistent, then you have to keep in mind that computer systems make mistakes. And sometimes a mistake can result inside of a retry. And if a retry for a payment has started and you mistakenly, or your system mistakenly, sends $100 transfer from one account to another account twice, that is not good for your business and not good for your users at all. And so when you're creating an idempotent system, it's helpful and it's required that you need to have systems and have checks in place to make sure that everything is consistent. So that means if a request is being sent, you generate some type of ID, some unique ID for that request. So if your system sees that same request again, it knows not to do anything with it if in case it was already processed. And having some type of way inside of the distributed system to catch any type of duplicate request like that, where if the request starts some type of series of events and you realize that it was a duplicate, you understand how to roll back or drop those changes. Idempotency is super important inside of a application where it's very financial sensitive, or it's some type of regulatory requirement where you need to understand and keep track of changes, but you don't want one change overriding an existing change that you already put in. It's the difference between saying, like I said, this payment went through and then you sent $100 to one person, or two $100 transfers to the same person. Idempotency is not, every Git request is going to be idempotent, because every time you say, give me this ID, unless the data was changed, you're going to always get the same information. So Git requests are kind of standard idempotent. Deletes are also going to be idempotent. The challenge inside of your API is going to arise when you have some type of put or update. If we're thinking like CRUD functionality. So a create or update request. You don't want to create two transactions or two payments. You also don't want to create two deeds. You also don't want to create two children if you have a social security system that is, creating or recording the birth of people. So that's where this is all coming from. You need to make sure that depending on the application, what level of consistency do I need with my data? Like what applications could be, it doesn't matter if you create 1 or 1,000. Well, if you think about the financial system, they have created $1 or $1,000 every day. So that's like inflationary. But I can't think of something right now from it, but it's all about whether or not you can have and still work with duplicates inside of your system. And sometimes a duplicate isn't bad, it's just going to become dirty data. So you may need to go back through it and purge that stale data.
What are 3 rules for good software maintainability?
Good software maintainability requires it to be readable. So whenever you're writing the code, you want to not think about what's the easiest way for me to write this logic. What is the easiest way for someone to read and understand this logic later? And that later could be for you, but it could also be for someone else who is going to inherit your code base once you're done with it. So that means sometimes adding comments and making sure, especially inside of large code bases, not just adding the comments for what is going on, because the code may sometimes be clear what is happening, but you want to add comments for why you're doing something a certain way. So, because that may be where the knowledge is not well defined and well understood for other people behind you. You want to make your applications modular. So that means creating small chunks of code to do very specific functions and not having large functions that do a lot of different things that require more context from the developer to understand. A modular application makes it easier to switch things out when need be. It makes it easier to troubleshoot when something is going wrong because you can see very clearly what and when a problem is starting. And that could be inside of your files. So like at a system level, like do you have a repository layer? Do you have a model layer? Do you have a controller layer? Are you separating the places where the data is updated from the places where the data is actually defined, that schema? Are you separating the functionality for AWS Lambda controls from the functionality for AWS SNS controls? Having some type of way to understand and separate that data makes it cleaner and easier for you to understand. And it also can be helpful for chatbots and AI when they're helping you to code to understand only the context that they need to make the change that you're requesting. As you know, with any type of AI system, the more context it has that is relevant, the better. Once you start adding context that is irrelevant, you start seeing a noticeable decline in the results that you want. And so that makes it helpful there. And also for documentation. Documentation is one of the best and easiest ways to make sure your software is maintainable. Having instructions on how to run and operate the code in any environment. how to deploy it, knowing what is the underlying process that this system is designed to support. And that could be stored with the code inside of your code base, or it can be in some other repository such as Confluence. You can have your documentation for the tests that your application is expected to run. And that could include some type of user guides or test data that can help you so you don't have to always recreate the scenario for testing whatever the function may be. It just makes it more easy for you over the long term to keep track of the code and the applications that you're building, because that's what you're looking for. You're not looking to create applications or create systems the fastest. That's how you create brittle systems that break when you need them most. You want to create something that will still work and will still be supportable when 5 years or 20 years or even longer has passed. And thinking about the long-term view and having a long-term view and mindset, one of my final thoughts today, I just wanted to share that if you believe in yourself, you need to be betting on yourself. And betting on yourself can look like many different things. It can mean making sure you go to bed early so that you can be waking up on the right time. Betting on yourself can be paying for the course that you need that can change your life and your future's life because it'll create a new opportunity for income. Betting on yourself can mean literally saying, yo, I'm going to not work here because I know that if I work here, it's going to take up too much of my energy and my time. So I need to have and focus that time and energy onto something else that is more valuable for me. There are a lot of ways for you to bet on yourself, but everyone needs to be doing that. I know some people have issues and challenges believing in themselves, and that's, of course, the core premise to being able to bet on yourself. But once you do believe in yourself, and if you do feel very strongly that you do believe in yourself, then the next step is to bet on yourself. A lot of people are confident that they are who they are, but man, if you don't show to yourself that you are who you are, how are you really going to keep that belief inside of you over the long term? And that doesn't mean with making wild bets. That doesn't mean saying, yo, I'm about to go to San Francisco. I got $1,000, but I know when I get there, I'm going to get that client. Man, that's a way to bet on yourself. I don't even operate like that, so I'm not even about to teach nobody to do that. I'm saying bet on yourself as in, invest an hour of your day into the business that you know that you can start that is separate from the main business that you have going on, and keeping that routine, that consistency in place for a year and just see what happens from that experience. Maybe the thing that you started off building becomes exactly what you imagined it to be. Maybe you get the hundreds and thousands of clients that you expected your product or service to generate. Or maybe you don't get the 1,000 clients, but you get 10 clients. And maybe those 10 clients teach you something that you would have never even known about had you never actually taken that step and stood in the space to believe in yourself and bet on yourself. Everyone, I'm not going to say everyone, but the betting landscape is becoming crazy. You could bet on anything. You betting on sports games. You betting on predictive markets like Kashi and others. You could bet on the election. You're betting on, whether a person is going to say something during an earnings call. These are crazy things to bet on. If you can bet on all of these type of scenarios, bro, you have no business not betting on yourself. Like, that should be the main thing you betting on. If not you, then who? For real. So just keep that in mind. If you're thinking about building, make that investment in yourself. Make that bet on yourself, because you are going to give better returns than anything else that you could think of. And that's pretty much all I had to say for today. I hope everyone has a wonderful week and is doing great. I also want to shout out my little cousin LJ. It is his birthday. Yes, his birthday is today, so happy birthday, LJ. I wish you the best. I wish you greatness in the future. And all of the other, I think it's Sag season right now. I'm not sure. But everybody who's a Sag, if your birthday is this week, or if you're doing something great and amazing, betting on yourself especially, I wish you the best. I wish you greatness. I wish you power and peace. And do your best, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Peace out.